Welcome to the September 23rd, 2019 Board of Selectmen's meeting. We opened our meeting at 6:15 to discuss a strategy session regarding Harwich Police Department contract. We'll have a good discussion. We'll bring that back for a short discussion next week. And then now I'd like to move into our open session and to start with I was going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, but let me read the mandatory statement first. As required by the open meeting law, you are hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. Someone has to show up sometime and do this. I read this announcement. I'll move to a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we start, we've had some changes in our agenda. On the agenda, the item on public hearing overview of the Phase 2 sewer project, and related to that, the contract E, award Phase 2 contract. We'll table that probably for 2 weeks because we'll table tonight because Chris, our town administrator, is out sick. And I didn't think it was fair to have Joe explain this because he doesn't have the background and long years involvement that Chris does. So we'll table that. Mr. Hooper, our DPW director, just informed me that we need to postpone the waste service discussions because one of the principal persons, Camaro, just phoned and they're unable to be here tonight. And so we'll postpone then. That's C under new business and
No, A.
no.
C
under new business
and A under public.
and A
Under public hearing.
and A under public hearing.
Right.
So those two items, the waste and the sewer, will table and bring those back. Moving on to weekly briefing. Joe, can you give us a brief update of where we stand on construction?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. This is the weekly update submitted by project engineer. It was submitted September 18th. The 1 week look ahead for this week is mainline sewer crew number 1 will continue installation on Johannes Path. Mainline sewer crew number 2 continue installation on Route 137. Again, that means the detours are still in place. 2 week look ahead for the week of September 30th through October 4th. Mainline sewer crew number 1 continuing on Johannes Path, and sewer crew number 2 continuing on Route 137. And 3 week look ahead, October 7th through October 11th. Mainline sewer crew number 1 continue on Johannes Path and continue installation on Route 39. Again, detours in place. Sewer crew number 2 continue installation on Route 137, also detours in place.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions or comments for Joe? Anyone else for weekly briefing? Amy?
Good evening, Amy Usowski, Conservation Administrator. I just wanted to update the board that we had a very successful 20th AmeriCorps Cape Cod 20th anniversary of the program. The Selectmen voted to support that program. They've been very active in the Harwich community for the past 20 years. And we participated as part of one of the keystone events of the weekend was a collaborative cleanup between Harwich, Dennis, and Brewster towns for the community coast sweep event. And total, here in Harwich alone, between AmeriCorps volunteers and some citizen volunteers, we had about 120 people show up to do that. Wow. So,
Fantastic.
just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else for weekly briefing? Public comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening, Selectmen. Patrick Otten, East Harwich. I wanted to notify you that Also, in conjunction with Coastal Sweep, this weekend, Saturday, the 29th, from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, the Sustainable Practices will be sponsoring a cleanup of Red River Beach. And that, just want to make that a public notice, and anyone that's interested can come. This is all part of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs and the Office of Coastal Zone Management out of Boston. So it's a statewide initiative, and hopefully we'll have some help on the Red River Beach this coming Saturday.
Thank you, Patrick.
Okay.
Thanks for participating.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Anyone else, public? Ed?
Yeah, last week I made a few brief comments on the Cranberry Festival and said I would, the following week, this week, have a little bit more information. As many of you know who've been in town for a long time, the festival's moved around a lot. It's been at different places in town. Was at the high school on Oak Street when it was a high school, Harwich High School, and then we moved it down to Brooks Park, and now it's back up behind the community center. And I think since we moved down to Brooks Park and sort of re-envisioned it from its days at the high school, we had the largest number of vendors participate in the fair this year, 160, which is, I know the first year we moved down to Brooks Park, we had 40. So we've done a good job of rebuilding it. We had 6 bands, 4 on Saturday and 2 on Sunday, which went off very well. And thanks to our friends with the Chamber of Commerce, after the band finished on Saturday, a very nice fireworks show was seen by all. And then we had a nice food court to help feed the crowd. We unfortunately had one of the vendors who was signed up to come not show up on Saturday, so lines were a little bit long in the food court, and that's something we're going to work on next year, so that moves a little bit faster. And the beer and wine sales for supporting the music were done well, brisk, and I think successful. One of the things we did this year, which astounded us, we put a barrel out by the entrance and just sort of asked for a free will donation. We did it last year, but unfortunately the sign was down on the barrel. Nobody could see it, so we put it up in the air. And last year, I think we raised a little over $180. This year, it was over $2,000, which is enough to fund a good additional scholarship, which is one of the things we do. The one thing that I'm sort of sad to mention, though, is that this is, in the years that I've been involved in, we're probably at our lowest number of volunteers we've ever been at. And quite honestly, we were down so low that a lot of things that should have gotten done didn't get done, and were left sort of flapping in the breeze. And from a control, public safety standpoint, it's, as the person who's in charge and responsible for it, it's hard to, unless we come up with some additional volunteers in the coming year, it's going to be hard to want to continue on and feel that it can be done successfully and safely. So I'm urging folks, if they're interested at all, to join. We had a couple new volunteers this year, specifically some folks from Citizens Bank and Cape Cod 5, which were very nice to have them come out. But over time, we lost a few. Volunteers get old, and it's hard to get up and out and do all the chores that need to be done. And so we're urging people to come forward. I know I've been reaching out to the Boosters Club, at Athletic Boosters, and they help on the day of the event, but we really need a few more people to sort of oversee you know, our traffic issues and transportation, our getting signage up. I mean, that was, it just wasn't, Saturday morning, there just wasn't the time to get the signs up that should have been. And we just need people to help plan that out and then deliver it on the day of the event. It's, I think, a great community event, and at 43 years, we should make 50, and I hopefully we do, but only if we get a renewed group of volunteers to help.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Anyone else for public comments? If not, we'll move to, there's nothing on the consent agenda tonight. Public hearings, as I mentioned, Mr. Kamara just notified us that he's not going to be able to make it, so we'll postpone that and hopefully have a discussion next week on solid waste. Next item is the Real Estate and Open Space Committee presentation. We as a board had asked the Real Estate and Open Space Committee to bring us up to date on their discussions of what the space is around town and their priorities and thinking going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As per your request,
Can you then you have to identify your.
oh, I'm sorry, Elaine Shovelin, Chair, Real Estate and Open Space Committee.
Dave Callahan, member.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody knows me. We've compiled this, which I'm sure you've had for a few weeks now and have had a chance to go over it. We thought the best way to present all these properties was to divide them into three groups. The first one being land acquisition, and there's currently two parcels of land that we're all very familiar with at this point, Deacon's Folly Road and Cherokee Road. Right now, we have not prioritized either one of those two. We're kind of waiting to see what the appraisals will come in as and some other questions, and then at that point, maybe we can make an educated priority for which one. If you have any questions about either of those two, my question is whether the appraisals are in motion. I know one was being done on Deacon's Follow. I didn't know if you had gotten any.
We haven't got anything back yet, as far as I know, Joe.
No.
But
Well,
they-
Elaine,
have
speaking
they
of,
been let out? Have they out for bid for?
I don't have information on that, Mr. Chairman.
What, Michael, just a clarification, what Elaine's mentioning about is we authorized the funding to do an assessment of these properties. So that's what we're
Appraisals, yeah.
waiting for.
Yeah.
Michael?
We did get notification from the town administrator, I believe it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that the Deacon's Folly had already engaged in a contract for that appraisal. The second one we voted, we had not heard from administration yet.
Okay. And that would be a determining factor.
Right.
And which one we think would be our top priority. The second group would be land that's currently under the care and custody of you, the Board of Selectmen, and which we would recommend to be moved over to the care and custody of either the Water Department or the Conservation Commission for increased protection. If you have any questions about those properties, we'd be glad to go through them.
Okay, the questions, Don?
Yeah, that 141 Bay Road. It's, the statements here, the initial purchase of this land with land bank funds does not provide it with protection it would have under the water. What's lacking? In terms of,
Because it's under Selectmen, it's not under Conservation.
but it was purchased through land bank funds, which means it can't be built on, or, I'm
It's
just
not the same
wondering,
as- It's still not the same as Conservation. It may not be able to be built on, but.
but you have it as opposed to the water department rather than
Yeah, well,
conservation.
we're just concerned about protecting the wells.
No, I get-
I'm not saying I didn't realize
Which
that.
property are you talking about, Don?
Bay Road,
What
next
page
to
is that
the
on?
well on Bay Road.
Priority 2. care and
Yeah,
custody.
prior to.
I mean, I was just curious because you know how I feel about protecting the land anyway. I mean, but I was just wondering what was lacking.
Just another layer. You know, every layer is better than, you know, as you were well aware. So that was the reason we,
And this has all been brought to the attention of the Water Department. Dave has attended their meetings and has discussed these properties with them that we feel are needed for the protection of the water. And if the Water Department doesn't act upon it, then conservation would be the next best move.
Did it seem like the water department jurisdictionally wanted?
the meeting that I had with the full committee was about a year and a half ago. And they were really interested in all of the parcels that I discussed. They said, well, we don't have any money. I said, well, these are transfers. And we'll talk about some other parcels that need to be acquired, but would also be for water quality. But since that time, I've had difficulty in getting back on their agenda. Alan Thompson and I have emailed back and forth multiple times and just couldn't put together a time where I could come.
I'm just saying that because if you do a warrant article, they're probably going to want to have an opinion on it.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
That's what, a lot of these transfers are to try to make sure that we get as much support, whether it's from selectmen, the real estate and open space, selectmen, and whatever commission or committee is
Okay,
responsible.
thank you.
Thanks.
Don, is that Ed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael?
The only comment I have is some of these look like naturals to transfer, but I hesitate in transferring, just generally transferring all this land to conservation. 2 years ago, when we negotiated the deal with the town of Chatham for the wastewater treatment, we were going to have to bring our effluent back. And we couldn't find a place to put it because nobody wanted it anywhere near them. The Bay Road piece came up, and we found a place on Bay Road that would have fit that criteria that we needed. And I know that at that point, the water commissioners were trying to take control over that because of the wellheads, and it turned into quite a debate. And I know we stumbled for a while trying to figure out where that effluent was gonna go before Chatham finally announced they didn't have to send it back. And I know on one of the Bell's Neck properties that town meeting took, it's a cranberry bog. And the will of the Board of Selectmen at the time wanted that to be a cranberry bog. It went to Conservation, and the Conservation Commission, as it sits today, voted to ignore the will of a lot of residents that wanted that to be a bog. So I'm going to hesitate on transferring anything out of care and custody from the Board
Well,
of
again, just to
Selectmen.
point out, we're only an advisory committee, and we were asked to compile these list of properties, which we're doing. It's certainly up to you all to decide which ones you want to move forward, and for whatever
Agreed.
reason.
And that's why we're having the discussion.
Yeah,
great.
that's why we're presenting it to you.
Great. Steve?
Well,
I have Ed?
Well, I think following up Michael's point, you know, in this situation, you're advising us,
Right.
but once a transfer is made, you are no longer an advisory, you are the operating party. And in some cases, you know, there was a tacit agreement on what was going to happen after the transfer that got ignored after the transfer was made.
Yeah, okay. I have a couple comments and questions.
Sure.
On page, I have it by page, the reason I kept my notes. On page 12, where you list priorities, when I look at this, I would switch priority 3 and 2. Only because it seems it's really important to get deed and title research done before we look at, land care and custody. That's something we've been going after a long time, is trying to figure out who owns what.
Right.
So that's just a minor suggestion, but I like that. I'm more comfortable with that priority switch. On page 21, let me see what property that is. One thing that comes up in a couple of these are we have to protect vernal pools. And that's granted by law, we have to protect the
Right.
vernal pools. But I think we have to be careful that a plot of land has vernal pools, we can protect those vernal pools as we're required to. But if it's a large enough lot, that gives us the acreage to build affordable housing, for instance. You can do it, smart growth ways where you have wide open spaces behind and some buildings up front. And so my opinion is we have to be careful with, see the word vernal pool, we can't build on a lot, whereas we could build on part of it and still do a good job protecting the vernal pools. As a matter of fact, we have to. That's not an option for us.
So you're referring like to Depot Road?
Right.
Depot Road, before. Yep.
That we take the whole property and is, well, I've said enough. You understand what I'm saying on
Right.
that? On page 24,
So we don't have page numbers, so.
I'll get to it.
Can I respond to
Yeah,
that?
just
Sure.
respond.
Because I have 2 points to make.
Yeah.
One, I thought that the amendment that was done at the town meeting
Yeah.
was meant to say that they could continue to use the acreage from that for building. They just didn't want anything built below, in that 100-foot buffer and below.
Right, which we
They had
can't.
already pulled
Okay,
out the lower stuff, but.
So we're okay on that then?
So, yeah. The
Okay.
second thing question I'd like to raise to you, now that the Affordable Housing Trust has decided that those really isn't, well, they're not gonna use it for housing?
Yeah.
Now, the town meeting transferred those parcels over to the Affordable Housing Trust. Does that mean that they have the right now to sell that to some other developer? And if so, would it still carry the vote of the town meeting to restrict development on that
Well, I
part?
think we'd have to bring it back. But again, the vernal pools are protected no matter who buys it.
I understand, but I'm saying, could they be
Don, you
sold
have
and
a
redeveloped?
point on the housing trust aspect?
Yeah, actually, this is a subset of the larger discussion you had as your first point. I think these are all good reasons for why you don't want to get to a town meeting and amend stuff and then having people see the town arguing with itself about what it's really willing to or not willing to do. And then you get into misunderstandings about what was being asked, even. I think that's largely being resolved. We've been all talking about that, all the stakeholders, about how important it is to get on the same page. That doesn't mean you can't have dissent. It just means bring it up soon enough so that we can address the issues to go to town meeting with. As for the property, that's confusing too. The trust did not say it would never use that for affordable housing. It hasn't gotten to that point yet. There's been a discussion about what MHP is willing to do in terms of the number of units that you can get on a property, and there's a dividing line about what they would support and help and what they wouldn't. That doesn't mean at some point in time we might not, and that's the juncture where we'd have to discuss if we're not going to use it, period. What are we going to do with it? But that discussion hasn't happened. All we've done is rank order prioritized what we did get and what looks like the most likely to max out as a first project to show some success, to build. We never said that, wow, this is completely unbuildable, I don't know why we took it. So that discussion has not happened yet.
But, all right, but let's still ask you a question. And I'm trying to think longer term. And in other words, what rights do they have to that property? Okay, can they just go sell it to a developer at some other time who doesn't have to follow what town meeting voted?
I think the short answer is no, but Michael?
I'm gonna say no, because we had several conversations when we built the housing trust and the Board of Selectmen transferred that land and those parcels came up, that if the housing trust didn't use them, that they would return them back to the town. I don't have the date and time of the meetings. To Don's point, it may not be a year's decision, it may not be 2, it might not be 5.
Yeah.
But it was very clear in those meetings to me that if the housing trust didn't use them for housing, they would return them to the town. And that would certainly be my will.
And I think it's important to not conflate all this stuff. If whoever owns it would be responsible under a site plan to do the same exact things. They're obligated to protect the vernal pools. It doesn't matter whether it's the Affordable Housing Trust, a developer, whomever. But we're degrees away from that. We haven't had a discussion that we're permanently not interested.
I'm not saying you are, all right, by any means. that, I'll accept
So I
the
think
fact
we'll have to come back to this.
It's a legal issue, it's really
Yeah,
the
well,
thing that's
we-
occurred, because I've heard
We
both
can
sides from different.
We can debate
different
this,
selectmen.
but this is initial discussion,
Right,
so let's come
okay,
back.
which is fine.
I have a third, Ed.
Just a comment, though, the Housing Trust received it with limitations placed on it by town meeting, and if they were to sell it somewhere else, those limitations would have to go with their, forward
yeah.
with their sale.
That's what we're all saying.
right.
So
That
that,
answers the question.
the hundred, you know,
That just
yeah.
raises, it lowers some tension that exists, let's put it
Okay.
that way. Thank you.
Good, we want to lower our tension.
And just a side note on the change of care and custody, I think you've also received some information from the Conservation Committee, and they also agree on a lot of these properties. They do support it,
Yeah.
too.
The third, I just have one more property that caught my eye on. I like this. And that's a Grassy Pond Road property.
Yep.
And what caught my eye on this is, basically it says it can't be developed due to extensive wetlands. If it can't be developed, why would we be interested in purchasing it?
I think it was raised because of, and Amy may be able to answer this. Yep.
I know the town is, in the land bank days, the town got accused of occasionally buying property that wasn't developable anyway, so it was basically a gift to a property owner. Amy?
So the parcel you're speaking of is 22 acres. That was Old Cranberry Bog, is kind of a shrub swamp now. Without saying it's not developable, it would be very hard to develop that parcel. That parcel is currently on the tax lien list. It's worth, assessed at about $25,000. They owe about $45,000 in taxes. So we were hoping to see if there was something, I'll be speaking with them about their options. So that, the reason we might want to acquire it is to be part of the holistic approach of the restoration of Grassy Pond, Cold Brook, the whole fish passage and ecosystem that extends from Saquatucket Harbor all the way up to Grassy Pond. So if we had ownership of that parcel, and we've met recently with the Natural Resource Conservation Service and many other state departments, having ownership of that parcel would make potential actions that we wish to do to improve habitat and fish passage easier.
Okay. Thank you, Amy.
Just for your information, the assessed value of this is $27,300.
Yeah.
But the back taxes due on it
Over
is
40,
$46,000. So
yeah.
this is,
Might be able to get it for
It's a-
taxes.
we may be able to gift it to ourselves,
Okay.
basically.
Thank you. Any other questions? I've gone through my, if not,
Ed had his.
Ed, sorry.
Yeah, going back up to the property off of Depot Street, as you go back in further, there are 3 or 4, I thought there were 4, but I'm only identifying 3 lots that run south of the pond
Yes.
back in there, which are privately owned. And I know a number of the people at various times have come in with various plans for developing it. Their problem is that they don't have utilities,
Right.
but it is not beyond the realm of possibility to develop a parcel that has access without public utilities. Have you looked at those? Because they all have frontage on the pond and connect up with other parcels that
I know that there's 2 for sale signs at the end of Middle Road now on Depot Road. I don't know if they're relating to the same parcel. I think they are, okay. And I think that's for the middle parcel that you're describing over there. We looked at those, but they're in private hands, and we know that at this point, there's not been any pressure to build on those up until recently, when these signs went up.
Yeah.
But we were asked at one point about the utilities, as you described, about what we felt about them running power lines over the town property,
Yeah.
and so forth. And we just did not take any action. We just couldn't see what the
They did,
we as a committee were.
collectively, the owners in that area got an article passed in the, at town meeting quite a number of years ago to allow establishing a utilities easement over the public property from Depot Street into those parcels, but
I don't understand why that's necessary, because that is an ancient way, and they should have rights to that road, and utilities could be brought in through that ancient way. That's Middle Road, and it,
but, it has to do with the power company. They don't find the right language in the deeds to allow them to go over the ancient way.
yeah. I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't research that at all, because it was.
Okay, well,
Anyway,
does anyone else have a question while we have these pair ready to answer all questions in front of us? Thank you very much for all the
Thank
work
you.
you're
Thank you for the
doing.
opportunity.
We didn't really get too into the deed and title research.
Yeah.
It's been an ongoing issue that we have money to spend, but we can't find anyone to give it to. And I asked that this be put back on the agenda, I think about a month and a half
Yeah.
ago, so that we could instruct the town administrator to put out an RFP to get you someone to do the deed research on the land that everyone else is doing deed research on.
Yes, thank you.
So I know that that's a priority, it's also a priority in
priority.
mine.
Very high. There are some of these properties that we've been looking at and discussing for several years and have just stalled because of
And it
that.
obviously fits in my request that you switch those priorities, because that is the big one, that's the,
Well,
what's out
you know,
there.
what's happening up there on what we call
But-
Little Shaver Lane is.
But Michael, we'll put it back on and see where we stand.
Be
Don?
glad to come
Yeah,
back.
I want to rise in support of what Michael said. I mean, we had the money, and we had the properties identified. It's just, it's not a matter of days, weeks, or even months. It's been a matter of years. So we got to make this a priority.
Well, actually, we've just recently discovered the names of 2 people who might be able to do it, but we don't know if they're still available or whatever. We just have to look into
Okay,
it.
great, yeah.
Isn't it an issue we can't find the professionals to do it?
Right.
Isn't that-
yeah.
Yeah.
That's been
That's
the
been the
issue, that's
huge
what we're
problem.
hanging on
Yeah,
for.
but we started out by just going to KP Law for a lawyer. And it's really just a title
No, but
abstract.
I thought there was some discussion the last time we were with you folks that there was an attempt to try to find people, and you
There
had as
was
well.
somebody who
and
was,
it's been-
there was somebody who
Only
agreed to
recently.
do it, and then for whatever reason, personal reasons or whatever, was not able to do it.
Yeah.
Recommended someone else several
Well,
months
this-
later,
let's
and
bring
that
that
person
back.
couldn't,
This,
so.
it's certainly important to us, we're bringing it
I
back
think
and see who we
RFP
can,
is a way to
we can
attract
get some names
attention.
out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this whole realm of researching properties, I know the Historic Commission has equally found it hard to find somebody to go back and research the historic properties in town. I know my wife, when she was on the Historic District Commission, they tried to find somebody, and they found somebody, and he sort of flaked on them, and, you know, it was,
Yeah, it's not easy.
yeah.
Okay, thanks again.
Thank
You've
you.
done a lot of work on this. It's very good. Next on the agenda is the discussion of the 2019 Lower Cape Community Housing Institute. Andrea, who's running for the door now. No, you're coming back.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Aldana. Thank you. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership. I'm also part of the housing team offering consulting services to the town. So I'm here to formally invite you all to this year's Lower Cape Housing Institute. Mr. Howell has already heard this lecture, so sorry you have to hear it again. But we are holding our 3rd annual Housing Institute starting next week. We're having sessions at the Eastham Public Library. It is Lower Cape focused, so hopefully that's in the middle and easy for everyone to get to. And just to remind you, the Housing Institute is part of a broader program called the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership, which is trying to address the affordable housing crisis on the Lower Cape. We do this by building public support for housing, including affordable housing, by training elected and appointed municipal officials like yourself, as well as town staff, business leaders and other community members around initiatives that they can take on and to support housing in their towns. We'll know that we've succeeded when there is broad public support. I think we've seen that in the past town meeting cycle where the discourse around housing has been significantly elevated across the Lower Cape. We're also looking to see zoning changes on the Lower Cape, specifically multifamily by right. We definitely want to see more affordable housing units on every town's subsidized housing inventory, and we'd like to see towns maximize utilization of their Community Preservation Act funding for housing. There are 3 pieces to the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership. The first is the Housing Institute. This is the bucket that is supporting town officials. In addition to the Institute, it also includes quarterly peer group meetings that we've been convening for a year and a half on the Lower and Outer Cape, as well as a slate of advanced trainings. We're working on a training right now on form-based code, which was of particular interest to Harwich at last year's Institute, so that's coming up in December. So if you're not on our Housing Institute monthly e-newsletter, please get in touch with me to find out when the form-based code training is, again, only for town officials. The second piece of this program is an advocacy training. We hold a training in the winter for community residents, so this is the non-public officials bucket, where we're helping people understand how to support housing, what that means. You're never going to see support housing on a town meeting warrant, right? It's always going to look like other things, zoning changes, funding, et cetera. And then we're also doing some, old school community organizing on the Lower Cape to help people get out the vote and support housing initiatives in their town. And then as far as the public education campaign, you may have seen the print campaign that we launched in March titled "We Can't Afford to Lose the People Who Can't Afford to Live Here." It also featured a Harwich resident, actually, and we're working on revamping that campaign for next year. We've trained actually over 130 town officials across the Lower Cape in the past 2 years alone, and it's actually 131 because the chief of police came in Brewster. But he doesn't technically count as our target audience. But if you're a chief of police, you're more than welcome to come to the Institute. So the Institute is specifically for municipal officials and town staff who are involved in housing production, either directly or tangentially. We have this year expanded who we are including. I'm not going to read the whole list, but if you're interested, get in touch with me and I will let you know if it makes sense. We're holding sessions 6 weeks in a row from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. starting next week, October 2nd, and as I mentioned, all sessions will be at the Eastham Public Library. And we always have food. We always have food. I would have wine if I could, but they won't let me. So every once in a while, people tell me, "Hey, Andrea, thanks so much for inviting me, but I already went." And I get that. I completely understand having a lot of evening commitments, but the Institute is more like a conference where if you're part of the field, you go every year because there's always something new to learn. It's not a one and done. If you went 1 year, then you already learned it. We change the Institute every year. So a couple things that are new this year are that we are in a moment right now where every single town in my catchment area, which is the Lower Cape, is currently involved in affordable housing development. This has never happened before. That's potentially hundreds of units coming online in the next 5 years. So keeping that in mind, we wanted to make sure that we follow the development timeline chronologically so that we know that there is something really useful for all of the towns in the Lower Cape. So the curriculum, all 6 weeks, are following the development timeline from the very beginning, where you're understanding how to, what your town's housing needs are and how to communicate those needs, all the way down to actually building something. So that's one big difference. The other thing is we really wanted to address the historical tension between housing and open space. These groups need to work together in order to address the affordable housing crisis. In fact, compact housing is the antidote to suburban sprawl that is eating up all of our open space, and we wanted to just deal with that head on. So we're doing that in a couple of ways. One way is we are actually inviting open space and conservation groups, and we have a session dedicated toward open space residential development, which I'll talk about in a moment. So what are we covering? Session 1 is going to be pretty similar. We're always going to keep session 1 sort of similar because we're going to be talking about the data, understanding what the crisis is, more importantly, messaging. Tactics around talking about housing have really shifted in the past few years. We're getting away from crisis mode and getting more action and solution oriented. So we're going to talk about how it's a more useful way of talking about housing so that you don't make people turn off, but that you make them engage. We're also going to have our state and legislative update like we always do, and we're going to talk a little bit about municipal leadership, which is something we haven't talked about, but is actually kind of the most important thing when it comes to housing production. Session 2 is our planning session. So last year, we focused on housing production plans and coalition building kind of outward. This year, we're coming more inward, and we're talking about planning broadly, and the focus is on community engagement. So the important piece to understand here is that we are supporting towns in conducting community-engaged planning processes. It doesn't have to just be for housing, it can be a local comprehensive plan. So anyone who is involved in any kind of planning process will benefit from this session. And the important thing to understand is that the utility of having a community-engaged planning process is that you bring your voters along for the ride from the very beginning. So they're not just hearing about things at the end when something is being built, right? When something drastic is happening, because you've been conducting an iterative process where you are both educating and getting people's input all the way in the beginning, and you're doing that constantly. That's a community-engaged planning process. Session 3, setting your town up for success. This is really useful for trusts, also useful for anyone in town who is dealing with money, that CPA Finance Committee. So this is about making sure that your town is well positioned to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. We're going to be focusing specifically on creative, high-impact revenue streams for your affordable housing trust. The key piece there is that the typical sources of revenue aren't really going to help us with the crisis, because we need to be expanding our housing supply strategy to this workforce housing, this community housing section of our residents that is not funded by traditional sources of trust funds. So we're going to be talking about the other types of funds that you can be going after. Harwich is actually a good example of cell tower funds. That's not something that all the towns are doing. And we're also be talking about a whole menu of things that towns can be doing to support the year-round community. Yes, actually having places for people to live is a really important piece of the affordable housing crisis, but affordability broadly is something that towns need to be looking at to support the year-round communities, and we'll be getting into all the nitty-gritty of that. Session 4 is our session that we designed specifically for open space and conservation groups. This is our zoning session. Judy Barrett is going to be doing the session. She's absolutely fabulous. We're going to be talking about zoning basics and zoning for compact housing, but the focus is really going to be on open space residential development. There are lots of beautiful examples out there of towns that have used land to both protect open space and build housing for their towns, so we'll be talking about those examples. And then sessions 5 and 6 are getting into the details of development, so analyzing optimal locations for housing development. That one is about how do you find a piece of land? We were just having this conversation. What are the criteria that you need to look for? What else are we talking about in the session? I'm blanking a little bit, but it's the pre-development work that happens before you send out an RFP, and Harwich is kind of in the middle of that right now, where the trust is doing pre-development on Sisson Road. Session 6, crossing the finish line. This is, okay, so now you know what you want to build on a site. Oh, you know what I forgot to mention? Session 5, creating a development strategy. I can't stress this enough. Towns on the Cape do not have a development strategy. The trust is actually going to be working on this soon when they embark on an action planning process. Having a development strategy means you understand what your funds are, what your resources are, you understand which sites are optimal for housing development, and you have a plan so that you know if you need to fundraise for it, that you have a long-term plan in place to actually accomplish concrete goals. I might be butchering that, but a development strategy is a key piece of housing production. Session 6, crossing the finish line, is so you send out an RFP. How do you select a developer? How do you arrive at really clear criteria for selecting a developer? What is the municipality's ongoing role in a development? Once the developer takes over, the town is not involved in actual construction, but the town does have an ongoing role to ensure the affordability of those units and make sure that they do not expire. So in a nutshell, that's what we're covering over the course of 6 weeks, but what you don't see here is the tremendous opportunity for building social capital and relationship building across your town and across the region. The groups that go to these sessions end up meeting more frequently and really learning from each other and sharing best practices and getting energized and are, encountering innovative solutions that you don't see as easily if you don't get out there and meet with other people. So you can register online, capecdp.org. It starts next week. If you're coming, we'd love to know sooner rather than later because we have lots of binders to print. I'd love for you all to be there, but at a minimum, I would really love for you to encourage other people in the town to please come.
Okay, thank you. Ed?
If you know there's particular sessions you want to attend, and I know there's certain ones I absolutely can't. Can I register just for,
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. This year, everyone can register a la carte. You do not have to sign up for all 6 sessions. You can pick and choose.
Don?
I have to confess, I know the answer to the first question, but I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
If we were going to encourage ZBA members and planning board members to go to a particular a la carte session, that would be?
Well, the zoning one I think makes a lot of sense, particularly because you're not going to find that education anywhere else. I would also say session 3, setting your town up for success. That is a session where all of the municipal stakeholders will be served well by getting on the same page and attending that.
And to go one step further to address the board itself, we had on the trust had a significant discussion, and we've had discussions in the past here about the need for people who are in regulatory bodies to get training, not open meeting training, but training on what they're doing. I would like to urge us to ask the administrator to write a letter to the, immediately to the members of the planning board and the ZBA, pointing out that this training is available. And how much does it cost?
It's completely free.
That sounds like a good price to me. So I would suspect that it would mean something. We've talked about the meaning of having the Board of Selectmen
And we
urge
can
those
follow up
members.
as liaisons too.
Yeah, but again, we had had that discussion at the trust about how much it would mean if the selectmen invited those members.
Thank you, Don. Michael?
No questions.
Stephen? I do have a comment, and that is, it may fit in your zoning discussion, but one aspect that for me personally, I would like to see a greater emphasis on or covered is the discussion of public-private partnerships. Because we seem to be coming at all this from a governmental aspect, rather than looking at what's around. Zoning's an aspect of that, because if you could build two two-bedroom houses rather than one four-bedroom house, you might. But if there's a way we could throw that in to be sure that that's I see that as a big factor that we don't talk much about. Or, taking houses that are run down and what can we do to help private fill this need?
So that's going to be covered in session 3, setting your town up for success. That's our catch-all for everything that's not actually building something. The conversation around public housing, public-private partnerships is not as straightforward as it seems, because a lot of people have different ways of defining what that means and whether or not it truly exists. Clearly, it does exist to a certain extent, but it is going to be covered already in session 3.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here wish to learn more? Sonny? I'm sorry, you have to go to the microphone now to ask your question.
harder than it
Those
seems?
sessions are, Sandy McClarty, East Harwich, those sessions are open to the public?
Not really. So the sessions are specifically designed for elected and appointed municipal officials and town staff. However, if you're interested, if anyone is interested in joining a board or committee in the next year, then you should get in touch with me and we can talk about if it makes sense for you to attend. Most people who ask me that question are typically better suited for the advocacy training. But again, if you're planning on being a housing production stakeholder at the municipal level within the next year, then I'd love to talk more.
Thank you.
Can I give a comment too?
Sure.
My wife and I have been talking about this ceaselessly. The housing crisis. We have lots of friends. I'm an electrician. I'm in the workforce, and this is probably better addressed in one of these meetings. But I want conservation, and I want affordable communities. It seems, in my mind, that say you did dense construction areas, at some point the pressure to gentrify or the pressure for more houses is always going to outstrip our efforts at some point, like in Europe, in Ireland, or somewhere where we're limited in our resources on the Cape, and whether we build 500 or even 1,000 units, at some point there's probably always going to be people from off Cape that want to move here, and therefore driving, cost up. So I guess my concern and comment is, I'd hate to go down the road of kind of chasing the carrot on the stick and then still not end up with affordable housing. Does that make sense?
Yep, does. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? If not, thanks again, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
All right,
Like
thank you.
later in this meeting.
Okay. Don't be wise guy, Don. We'll just go continue here. Next on the agenda is new business, and we have continuous annual meetings that we started last week. Recreation and Youth Committee.
Good evening, John Mahan from Harwich Youth and Rec. Joining us this evening, we have Lee Culver, Vaughn Cachadorian, and Frank Crowley. You have a copy of the report, so I'll be very brief. Thankfully, we have a full commission. We have no quorum issues. Another very successful year for the Recreation Department. I'm happy to announce fully staffed for the summer. Lifeguards, gate guards, playground assistants, everybody. And part of that is, I think, the fact that the town was kind enough to increase the salary for the lifeguards a year or two ago, and I think that's made a big difference. The Recreation Department offered 78 different programs for the various group age levels last year, which is fantastic. The numbers continue to increase year over year. I think there was one that was steady, but most of them increased. Very busy summer at the beaches. Interestingly enough, Pleasant Road was by far the winner in increase in sold day passes. And we're attributing that to the fact that Red River and Bank Street are full on a nice day by 10 or 11 o'clock. So that's a good thing. People are spreading out. The other thing that they did this year is they added a 5th session to the summer camp, which they've never done before. The demand was there. They asked Eric, he was able to staff it, and they took care of that. Sand Pond revitalization is moving forward. CPC and the voters approved the money for a new bathroom down there, so that'll be moving forward. Looking forward to finishing up Phase 4 at Brooks Park. And as always, would like to thank the voters for their continued support. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do the things and make the improvements that we do. And as always, the Harwich Highway Department for all they do for the parks, the beaches, and the fields. I mean, we're very fortunate. If you drive around and look at some of the other facilities, we are top-notch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions, comments?
Just thank you.
Great job. I probably ride my bike by Red River Beach more than others, and you're right. If you're not there early, it's
You're gonna get there early,
glad I'm on
Larry.
a bicycle. It's
Okay.
Ed?
I just want to thank the commission and the department for the expanded summer camp that they did this year, starting a little bit early to help out the parents in town with childcare issues. It was a real boon to a lot of folks and much appreciated. And then I guess on the other hand is, you mentioned Phase 4 of the Brooks Park, and I'm not exactly sure what that all covers, but one looking at a portion of Brooks Park now, maybe the tornado presented us with a Phase 5 to look at. Do we just let the area that's been so badly hit, not with tree loss, just regenerate by itself over the next 30 years, or do we have other thoughts? And that's something maybe the Park Commission and some other commissions in town could look into.
It's funny you should bring that up. We have on a guest tomorrow at the recreation meeting, a high school student who is coming in to give us a proposal on just that.
Oh.
On what we should do, how we could do it, and a fundraising idea to do it. So it'll be interesting to see what she has to say.
Cool.
Thank you, John.
Yeah,
Cool.
Anything else? If not, thanks, John.
thank you.
Next on the agenda is a report from the Harwich Housing Committee. And,
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Board of Selectmen, Art Bowden from the Housing Committee, and I'd like to give a recognition to one of my members here, Mary Maslowski. She's a strong member and always has a lot to say, and she says it very elegantly. So, now with that, go along with my annual meeting to the board. The committee has a full membership now of 5 active members. We reach a quorum at each meeting, of course. All our members have been sworn in. All the members have current state ethics committee certificates. We post agendas and minutes for all our meetings, except for June and July, which we did not meet. During the past year, our members have attended the Housing Institute training and workshop classes. We have a representative on the County Home Consortium. And also, we appointed a representative to the Community Preservation Committee. We attend all meetings of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee, as well as all Affordable Housing Trust meetings. Currently, the Housing Committee has asked to be put on the Board of Selectmen's agenda to discuss ways the Housing Committee can support the Affordable Housing Trust and possible changes to our mission statement. Respectfully submitted, Arthur Bowden, Housing Committee Chair. Thank you.
thank you, Art.
Questions?
Questions or comments? Don?
Yeah, I have to admit that Art and I have spoken about that last item. He asked me, and I think that's something that needs to happen here, where we have to clarify just how everybody relates to everybody else.
Makes sense.
Okay. That'll be a two-way discussion. We can keep that going then. But any other
No, just
comments?
thank you, Art. and
Thank you.
Committee,
Great
Mary,
job.
the outspoken Mary.
Okay. Probably her new nickname from now on,
Yep.
probably. Next on the agenda is the community center facilities, and Mr. Culver, you're.
Good evening, Lee Culver, Chairman of the Community Center Facilities Committee. You've had a chance to look at the report. The community center is going to be 20 years old next February. Carolyn is putting together a birthday spectacular, and I would invite and hope that all of you participate in some of the activities that are going to be taking place. They've even gone into the video archives and pulled up videos of what we've done over there since we built the place. We probably don't want to see them, but because we're all a lot bigger than we were back then. The Facilities Committee has a full quorum. We have no attendance issues. Everybody's sworn and have partaken of the ethics exam. We have a couple issues that we're trying to deal with. When we hired Carolyn, she was the director of the community center. She presently is the director of the community center, the overseer of the cultural center, and the rental agent for the shacks at Saquotucket Harbor. I know that we're probably paying her for half the hours that she works every week. I get concerned that we're burning the girl out. We've had a request into the administration to advertise for a 19-hour position at the cultural center for a month, and we're still waiting for an answer. I really would like to get some help over there and kind of allow Carolyn to have some days off, take up some vacation so she won't lose it. She's done an outstanding job with the community center. I couldn't be happier with the way that place is going. Our figures go up every year. The programs we offer are outstanding. The groups within the community center, the recreation department, the COA, they all work together to put our best face forward. And I'm being one of the people that kind of came up with the idea over there. I can't be more proud of what we've accomplished over there. And I lay a lot of our success at the feet of our director. and I want to take care of her. Thank you.
Lee, you said there were two issues. That was one.
No, I think it's just the one.
Okay.
Well, the second
See
issue is
above.
the second issue is the part-time. We need to get that authorization to advertise for a part-timer at the cultural center.
Okay, so it's overwork and part-time. Okay. Yeah, just to, because you helped design the building, right, Lee? You're on the
Yes,
first
I
building
was
committee.
one of,
So, we do need to go back and just remember that. I always look at that and think how, hate to say this, but how smart you and your committee were to organize youth on one side and the Council on Aging on the other side, so that hopefully they'll meet in the middle. I'd like to see more programs where they actually meet in the middle,
they do, I mean, you'd be
but they
surprised.
do quite a bit of that.
Yep.
But just the design is, I look around, there's very few buildings that are that well thought out in terms of getting people coming together, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I think it's working. Any other comments, questions, Michael?
No, just to follow up on the 19 hours, that was approved by town meeting in the budget as well, correct? Correct?
Yes.
So we just need to move
Through
ahead.
administration, can we try and get on this?
Yeah.
I do think we have done and responded to many requests over the years that I've been here anyway, and gotten Carolyn as much help as we could.
Yep.
But I would agree with you that she does not get paid for every hour that she works, and she goes way above and beyond, and it shows in every building that she's part of.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks, Lee, and Ed, and thanks, Carolyn.
After last week, I know one of the design features of the building when it was originally built was to put certain features into it to allow for future expansion, possibly addition of a pool. And with the presentation of the Y, looking in this area of a place to build a facility, including a pool, has the facilities committee reached out to them and at least had a discussion with them?
No, I don't, you have. Carolyn has.
Okay.
Carolyn has.
Okay, that's enough, just that you've reached out at this point.
Okay.
Anything else? If not, we repeat, but thanks, Lee, and thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Ed. Next then, thanks for the annual reports. Next is item B on new business, request for approval of a one-day beer and wine license for Bee-Free Coaching and Wellness for event on October 18, 5 to 7 p.m. Michael?
I move that we approve the request for a one-day beer and wine license for Be-Free Coaching and Wellness for an event on 10/18/19 from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., serving wine only.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, I just have a question. I mean, it doesn't seem to say here that they're selling the liquor. I mean, they're saying that they've got a group that's
Serving.
restricted to 20 people or women who are going to be served.
Right, okay.
I'm not even sure if they need a license for that.
Michael?
All the more reason to approve it unanimously. I read it the same way, but they asked, so why not give it to them?
Let's do it, not just cruise the books. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It was unanimous.
Yeah, it was.
Next is noise violations by perk submitted to the police chief. Michael?
I move that we refer this to the town administrator as the public hearing agent for a noise violation by perks submitted by the police chief.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. E is noise violations, and that, I think I'll table that until next week. And that way we'll get an update from Chris on that.
Just a
Michael.
comment for the public, anyone that's paying attention, that was tabled last week because there's ongoing negotiations. So for next agenda, if we could put that back in old business so that we're not,
Yeah.
so it doesn't look like a new violation because it is not.
Good point. Next one, vote to support the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust General Application, part-time coordinator and project funds, and Deacon Foley Road acquisition for affordable housing.
Well,
in
before
open
that,
space?
Mr. Chair, there's two different things going on
Right,
here.
one's affordable housing and open space conservation, is that what you're talking about?
I'd like to speak to the first one.
Please.
So I wasn't just joking about Andrea before.
Right.
The first one, and I would urge us to support it, I went over the math with our administrator at the last meeting there. To remind everybody, we renewed the contract for the CDP for the second year, but they were both $30,000. The first one was $30,000 for 6 months. The second one was renewed for $30,000 for 12 months. So this application has in it an increase for the support staff. That's why.
But it's 50,000, right?
It's 50. Personally, I think it should be more like 60 or 70 because as we ramp up, there's more to do. Plus which there's the pro rata thing where we only had 6 months and now we got 12, so we'd be diluting the activity significantly. But the application we got is for 50, and I'm just pointing out that it's really needed. It's not like empire building. If you just look at the calendar, that's why we did this.
So your basic point is that we
I urge us to
move on
I
this,
would move that we
but
support
it may
that
come,
application.
may have to come back later for additional support.
Yeah, I was just explaining what's in it, so I would move that we support that application.
Okay, Michael,
Well, if that's a motion.
It
we're
is.
waiting
is
for
there a
second.
motion? Is there a second?
I have comments, but I'll.
Okay,
Well, this application is coming from the Board of Selectmen?
The Housing Trust, and they would like us to support
Oh,
it.
okay.
okay. Michael?
So I'll second it for discussion then.
Okay,
Okay. So this is from the Harwich Affordable Trust, and you're supporting both. I guess my question, Don, is it would have been nice to get, I think, maybe the minutes to the meeting and the conversation, because as you just said on this, on the 30,000 for 6 months versus a year, and going to 50,000, there's really not a whole lot in there that says what they're gonna do for 50,000. And if I remember correctly, we're sharing this person with another town, it's not just Harwich.
But, Mr. Chair, that was the case last year also. The thing here is, we just had this discussion at the last trust meeting. There's no minutes I could have given anybody because that just happened 10 days ago.
can I ask you, Don, to follow up and give us a minute?
I-
So we'll go.
I can get you
we
that,
can-
but the second part of this is that there is a deadline for submission, which is kind of, it was October, which is kind of why.
Well, yeah. Michael?
I guess my other question is, if we're sharing this person with another town, Don, we're already they're doing 10 hours a week for 30,000, and now they're asking us for 50,000. What are they doing for the other town? How much duplicate work is there? So that's on the position, which I'm not gonna support right now. On the other piece of it, the Deacon's Folly, the conversation that this board had on Deacon's Folly, there was a lot talked about its inappropriateness for affordable housing, or potential inappropriateness because of where it sits and because of other pieces of land that would be more. I just remember our conversation, leaving that meeting, let's see what the appraisal says. And I understand the deadline, but I don't think there was a consensus on this board that that was the piece that we wanted to pursue for affordable housing. And there's been no conversation since.
I get that, and this probably should be a bigger agenda item. Getting back to the staff hours, they haven't been billing for the hours they're actually doing because they're restricted by contract to that figure. They're spending way more than the 10 hours, and they have been. I'm just concerned that they're gonna get down to 4 hours or 5 hours, because when you amortize the 30 grand over 12 months, there's a lot less available in staff hours, because you've got Belinda and Andrea that are involved in this. And we're at the point now where we're trying to develop the structure. We're gonna go out on a bid to try, which they have to help develop, to get the assistance to how the Housing Trust will operate, and its operating plan, which is part of this. As for, we had discussion about the Deacon's Folly thing. On the plus side, there's a partnership, which is something I really dearly would love to encourage, between people who want to deal with conservation and protecting land and people who want to deal with affordable housing. This is one of those areas where even the Harwich Conservation Trust would like to be involved in a mixed project like that. As for the transportation, it's a chicken or the egg thing in some ways, because Harwich is still designated as a rural area. I can't create a city center, but I can tell you that the RTA routes things based on who lives where they live. If we don't build it, they're probably not going to service the area. If we do, there'd be significantly more people, and they might send a bus down that route. I don't know how to answer that question other than it was approached, we were approached by the Trust in Real Estate and Open Space. They thought this was a terrific possibility for two seemingly disparate groups to get together on a project so that we could do both things at the same time. Beyond that, I mean, you'd have to have Andrea back here, and we'd have to have a fuller discussion about why it is. But we did vote to support this application at the Trust. So one way or the other, it's going to go there. We were just hoping to get support from the Selectmen.
Michael?
Do we have to support it this week? I mean, are we on that much of a time crunch? Because I guess I'd like to
not.
understand why we're not doing the application just to fund the Affordable Housing Trust and then pick the project. Why we're designating a neighborhood or a potential piece of land that we haven't agreed yet to, that we thought we would support. And then just back, I would like to see a little bit more, Don, of a job description. I know you guys are voting it, but if I'm being asked to support it, at $57 an hour for what they're doing now, and I know you say that they're doing more work, but how do we know? I haven't seen anything.
Well, as the same person who's the chair of the Trust is also absent tonight as the town administrator, can't have that. I can't add to that, but we could put the application as a trust and then pursue these other questions, because this is just a support vote. Without this vote, the application's still going to be going in. So, yeah,
Well,
I mean, I guess we could hold off on that
Well,
until Chris is here.
I'm comfortable holding off, certainly on the Deacon's Folly acquisition part of that.
And that's all I was really talking about so far.
I'm a little concerned about holding off on the money for the coordinator, because we just started this, and we're in a formative stage. I'd hate to cut this at its knees, but Don, I want to be comfortable that it's going to keep going.
Michael's right. I mean, we're going to submit the application one way or the other, whether or not we get the support from the Selectmen. If he's got
So it
questions,
doesn't hold something
if
back
anybody's
on
got
that.
questions, they should ask her.
Okay. I think you've answered my question. It's not going to hold. She's still going to be working on it. I'd hate to kill this project at this point. It's just getting started.
I don't think it doesn't sound to me like it's killing it. It's
Just get more
a little
information.
more definition around it.
So
yeah.
I'm more comfortable. So
I'll withdraw the motion. I mean,
Well-
just wait then.
we'll bring it back then. Michael, Don, I'll wait for you to bring back then when you want to put it back on the agenda.
Yeah, that's actually Chris. I'm just here as the vice chair.
Okay, I'll ask Chris that question tomorrow then, if he's back. Ed?
Yeah, certainly, whenever we vote approval of supporting it, they'll have meetings where they review each of these things, and that would be appropriate time for one of us to attend and deliver a letter of support.
That's where Chris's contribution's got.
Okay. Thank you, Don and Michael. Next item is a discussion on the town administrator's contract authority. And this came to me as, I think, Michael, you raised this, so rather than try to speak for you, I'll let you speak.
Okay. I know that, I'm not sure it was this full board, or it might have been the last board, voted, not unanimously, but voted to give all contracting authority to the town administrator pertaining to Phase 2 wastewater. I think it's completely irresponsible. I've said that before. I don't believe that this board is seeing the change orders that are coming through. I'm not sure that the finance director is seeing the change orders. But I believe, based on what's going on in East Harwich, based on the $8 million bumble that we have to go back to the public with because we underestimated that project, that this board should be looking at absolutely every contract related to East Harwich, and we should withdraw the ability for him to sign all the contracts. And I did notice tonight, which we did table, we're going to authorize the town administrator to execute the Phase 2 contract for $6,621,000.
Yeah.
Why would we, as the governing body of the town, why would we give up the contracting authority and the ability to look at these contracts to make sure that the funding sources are there, to make sure that the finance director checked off on them. I'm against 25,000, but if we're really gonna be giving away $6 million contracts, why wouldn't we be looking at them? Especially now with what we seem to be having some procurement woes with our chief procurement officer. I'd be a lot more comfortable if we were paying attention.
Any other discussion? Don?
Yeah, I'd like to broaden that discussion. I mean, it's kind of like a destination point that you're going to. It doesn't matter to me whether you started out on a bus, in a car, in a plane, in a train. It's the destination. It's whether you're signing a contract or not. And one of the things that occurs to me in the broader discussion, and it came when I started thinking about this, it's actually frightening. There are certain classes of procurement that are considered to be exempt classes. You don't get competition off it. I don't think the public quite understands. We've never gone out for competition on legal counsel or on our engineer for any of the sewering stuff. It's just been, we pick somebody and we negotiate what the price is. Personally, more so for that, those contracts, if his delegation of authority monetized is $25,000, I don't see how you can take this vast amount of money and take it sideways and swipe it off the table and say, the same person that doesn't have ability to sign anything more than 25,000 now has the ability to sign 6 million. It doesn't sound coherent. You either do or you don't have signature authority.
Steve? And I'll,
Yeah, just a question, not having served on the board before this. What has been the policy in the past?
Michael?
It was, for the 4 years that I've been on, up until last year, it was 50,000 or over the board took care of. 50,000 and under the town administrator took care of. We voted to change that 50,000 to 25,000. But then on a separate vote and a separate motion last year, it was determined that he could execute all Phase 2 wastewater. And that
Just Phase 2 wastewater?
Phase 2 wastewater contracts.
Well,
Larry, you were on the board, right?
yeah, and, you know, it's a good point, because we're, you know, the fact is that this contract has come back to us for approval, the $6 million. I think the question is we approve the contract, but then what happens to change orders after it's in place, right? And I see there's a good argument made that they should be treated no differently than the original contract. If there's a phase or, you know, a change in the contract, that should come back to us in the same manner. Michael?
And I hope, Larry, that we're talking about contracts in general, because
Contracts in general.
I think not just change orders, but I mean, if there's new contracts coming in for CDM Smith, for instance, for additional engineering services, we should
I'm saying that
approve
a
those.
change order should be treated no differently than the original contract.
Or
I'm
even
just
an-
trying to simplify the discussion.
Or even an exempt class contract. It doesn't matter where it starts.
I'm not making that distinction.
Yeah.
I'm saying if that's the authority, then it should be consistent across the board. I'm just simplifying the discussion. That would make sense to me. Steve?
No, excuse me, it seems to make sense to me as well, so I'm just interested to see why the change took place. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Ed?
if we could get a copy of the minutes when that happened and see what the language of the motion was, before.
We can dig that out. We'll find that. Michael?
I'd be willing to wait the week, but Stephen's gonna be gone for 2 weeks, Ed's gonna be gone for a week. And as I've said in the past, really what it comes down to is this board, skipping what the last board, is this board okay with allowing the town administrator to have contracting authority without any approval of this board on the East Harwich wastewater project?
I've already stated my opinion. If someone would care to make a motion of that, we can take this on.
I will make a motion.
Steve?
No, you go ahead and make the motion.
I move that we remove the authorization for the town administrator to execute contracts for Phase 2 wastewater, Phase 2 East Harwich wastewater, and change orders.
Could I suggest, if I may, Michael?
Sure.
To turn that around to a positive statement that
Yeah,
the
globally.
authority, you know, contracts, change orders, exempt or non-exempt, will all come back to the board for their approval.
You're much better at the nice part than I am, so you go ahead and make the motion.
Yeah, I would move that we,
Well, do you agree with that, my move?
I think that it really should be very simple, that.
All contracts,
That
change
all
orders.
contracts, regardless of their source, be executed above $25,000 with the consent of the board,
There's a second to that?
Including change orders.
including
And-
change
and
orders.
Any change orders.
Any change.
That's
orders,
my-
Any denomination.
Whatever class of contract, whatever way it was
I'll second that.
advertised.
Okay. John?
Can I make a,
Sure.
or ask a question? So is this just dealing with Phase 2? Or is this
No,
No, it's
any
all
project?
contracts.
Any contract.
Okay. So I guess I would just make one observation, having just done a couple of projects. And if every time we have something that comes up that requires a change order, that we have to then put on the agenda and come to you for approval for a change order, that will bog things down from my perspective. I mean, because there's a lot of small change orders that come up in a project. And I just would ask that you consider that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm hoping that the 25,000 at least eliminates the nickel and dime stuff and brings back the more major items.
It doesn't affect
Michael?
below
So
25.
it's, I could leave it at, I could leave it. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to ask John, does the 25,000 make a difference in that, John, to your?
Yes, that would make a difference.
Okay.
So let's make sure that's
Yeah,
defined.
that's the motion.
I think
It's
you said
globally,
any change orders
or
is what I heard.
So
contracts.
it's
So-
25,000.
Change orders and contracts exceeding $25,000 will be the purview of the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. And there's a second, I think?
Yes.
Second, Steve?
And I just, again, as Ed pointed out, I'd like to kind of know what the logic was behind this before. I don't want it to stop this. I'm not.
We'll
trying
try to dig out the minutes to
But I
figure
would
that
like to
out.
understand what brought the board to make that decision.
Yeah.
When they made it.
Can I be clear about that, though? There's two different things going on here. What Ed's talking about, there are minutes for, and there's a footprint. The exempt classes of contracts was never a conscious action at all. The administrator apparently decided that since they weren't competitive, they weren't covered under the original vote of 25,000.
But we'll just.
That was not an action.
But we'll move ahead with that.
This is a clarification.
If there's no more discussion, we've had motions.
What is on
All in
contracts
favor?
are we talking?
Legal,
Joe, do you
engineering.
want to say
I
something?
didn't catch the second.
Michael seconded it.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? If not, Michael?
No, I'm gonna vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, unanimous.
Now I have a comment.
Michael?
John, this came up because we've had a lot of people discussing change orders already in Phase 2 wastewater. And unlike your project, we're over $8 million from what we told town meeting. So for me, every $15 in East Harwich actually makes a difference at this point. And that's why we wanted to know. But for your projects, and I'm fine with the 25,000, but the reason I said it the way I said it is because they are coming up, and I want to make sure our finance director has the money in the account to pay them.
Norm?
Mr. Chairman, you know, my feeling on change orders, they're irritating, but it's life.
Yeah.
I find it glass half full here. I'd rather bundle, as I've done with Station 2, bundle them to exceed that 25,000 for transparency.
Yeah.
So you'll see,
We appreciate that.
you'll see 15 change orders, but you'll be able to see exactly what they are, and many times they exceed the 25,000, and hopefully you will
And we
approve them.
appreciate that, and that works for us.
That's why we love the way you do things.
Don?
I would just counter that, except you can't start work unless you have a signed change order. So if you're waiting to bundle, progress is
But you
not
don't-
being made.
But you don't need to wait to bundle if 25.
Well, I mean, if things, I mean, if
That's
we're,
not part of our motion.
That
That's
wasn't-
what
Okay.
helps us out. If 25,000, how you get there or not?
Mr. Chairman,
Joe?
I only say this because the vote was already taken, but just to make the board aware that under procurement laws, there would be certain change orders that if they rise to a percentage of the original contract, require that change order to actually go out for procurement again.
Okay.
So, and I understand where the board's coming from, and I say, I understand because Griffin Ryder and I are the primary procurement team, so we're aware of this. We'll factor it in as we've already done, and we'll keep an eye on the change orders, but also advise the board if a change order dollar amount necessitates another procurement.
Good. And we expect your expertise on that.
And that we have
Thank
funding
you.
sources.
Always.
I do need to clarify, I agree with the harbor master, that there are some little things, if we change a light style or a fixture or something, that doesn't, we don't, but if there's something that's, you know, gonna be built up to some monetary things, because I agree with them, we'll be dead in the water if we have to worry about every time we
But
change the color
What
of
we're
a light bulb.
saying is that that's your discretion of how you bring it to us. Okay? Moving on then to contracts.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll try to say this with as strong a voice as possible. As I mentioned last week, here is the procurement for Fire Station 2 furnishings and related materials with the actual contract included. Again, my apologies on that oversight, but as you'll see in the packet, the original ink contracts were received. They're in your signature packet. The finance director has reviewed and approved, and so we are seeking the board's acceptance of the contract and then the board's signatures on the contracts.
And you want to speak to the legal concern we have on is how we add up to 100,000 or?
So that'll be
That's
coming
a
up on
different-
the next three contracts,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
getting ahead of myself. Any discussion on fire station number 2? Michael?
I move that we approve the fire station number 2 procurement contract as presented.
Second?
In the amount of,
In the amount of $26,227.13.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. B then is the Brooks Free Library pump motor drives.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I move that we approve the contract for the Brooks Free Library pump motor drives in the amount of $31,500.40.
There a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
I'm going to abstain.
okay, Mike, one abstention. Joel's asked us to table the Brooks Library Energy Management System for now. I guess you're still working out some details.
Oh, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
D is, on the agenda then, is a vote to approve Brooks Library, Free Library boiler replacement.
Mr. Chair?
Ed?
Move that we approve the contract to replace the Brooks Free Library boiler, the cost of $80,800.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous?
Same abstention.
I'm
Abstention
against.
here? Okay.
So I haven't,
311.
yeah, I haven't satisfactorily.
I'm for it. So it's 311 then on that one. As I mentioned, starting the meeting, I want to table the Phase 2 contract, and it looks like we'll need to table that for 2 weeks, because we're going to lose some of our members next week. Not permanently, but they're gone for a week.
I don't know, Steve may go see his granddaughter and decide to stay in Germany.
Okay, yeah. Nothing on old business. Town administrators report, winter boat storage license. Joe and John, you want to?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm going to defer to the harbor master if he's okay with that. I will tell you that I sat in on the meeting with the administrator and the harbor master, but I think it's safer that he discuss, and I will support his discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. So as the memo that I put forward to you mentions, we have had a long-standing relationship with Allen Harbor Marine, as you all know, and we had been operating on a 2-year license extension that expired May 20th of 2019, and therefore we have to advertise and put it out for bid again. And so I believe it was the board's, my understanding of the board, that we wanted to continue that relationship. I know boat storage has been discussed in the past, and you know, this department is no longer doing winter boat storage directly with the customer, and that's not what I'm asking here. But what I am asking is whether the town wants to continue to provide space at Saquatucket, put it out for bid to allow, as it states, persons, firms, you know, marinas to utilize through a license our property at Saquatucket. And I put 2 areas that I'm suggesting we consider when we put it out for bid, or if we put it out for bid.
Thank you, John. I have one question. You mentioned both persons and firms. In our previous discussions, my memory may be failing, but I thought we were pretty much directed toward firms rather than putting you in the bulk storage business individual by individual, which would take a lot of your time. Is that?
That's not, maybe it was
Maybe am I
termed wrong. I
misreading this?
utilized this the last time we published a public hearing, or a public notice for that. I'm not suggesting that we're getting involved in the boat business. So it's really, you know, the marinas, the boat yards.
You still make the decision on a firm or a boatyard comes in and wants to use it then, rather.
Well, you guys make the decision. We'll write it up in a lease agreement, you know, based upon their bid, whether we want to, you know, offer our property for that.
Okay, okay. Thank you, John. I think that answers my question. Don?
Mr. Chair, I'm just curious, while John's still here. Why is this a license to use land and not a land lease? Because we're giving over that property and the jurisdiction to it that we own to somebody else to perform services. And I ask that specifically because if it were a land lease, we'd have to fulfill certain requirements. You have to let town meeting know you're doing that. I'm just curious about how this morphed into a license.
Joe had his hand up.
Joe?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll try my hand at it and first say that the procurement team was aware of this, that the present agreement had come to expiration. And so when the harbor master came to the administrator and myself, you know, I agree that the license agreement that was originally executed could be executed again. And the reason why it would be a license agreement and not a land lease is that you're asking parties to perform a service, but the town is not relinquishing its ownership or property rights to the land upon which the activity is taking place.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Any other, Michael?
John, last year, Area A was under construction, so we didn't lease it.
Correct.
And we didn't go out for lease. So your ask is for, and I would guess based on where it landed on the agenda, we can't vote tonight on this?
We were looking for the board's direction as to how you would like us to proceed as a agreement.
So your intention is to go out for RFP and see who comes back, and then you'll come back to us with people or no people?
Yes, sir. Really, what I'd like to be able to do, because we're getting close on time, is to be able to put the public notice out. And then we receive bids, and then we come to the board for
Okay.
approval.
Michael?
I have no problem with it.
Anyone have a consensus to move forward? John, you have our blessing, such as it is.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that the only item I have under the Assistant Town Administrator's report
Okay.
is the board received late this afternoon, you may have missed it, but I received a copy this afternoon from the HEA, and I just wanted to inform the board that the matter that both parties have been dealing with, the HEA has confirmed that it's been satisfactorily concluded, and they sent a letter noticing that and with their thanks. And again, you folks are getting that as your correspondence, but I just wanted to announce that to
Okay.
close the loop on that.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Appreciate their efforts on that as well.
Thank
And that concludes my report, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right. Selection report, Don?
One serious matter, it's just not to be acted on tonight, but at some point, we're going to have to put on the agenda what was the pet burial ground. They voted to relinquish authority back to the Board of Selectmen, but I believe that needs a town meeting vote after that to confirm the jurisdictional change. So at some point, we may want to look into that.
Okay, I'll bring that.
And secondarily, Mr. McManus and I had the distinct pleasure of cutting the ribbon to open up the Cornelius Pond walking trail today. He carried me halfway, and I carried him the other half.
Thank God Stephen didn't go.
He
Yeah,
would've
that would've been good.
Stephen would have carried both of us.
Ed?
Yeah, I think we ought to check the motion that was made at town meeting last, because I believe the motion was to return the property to the selectmen, and all that, have that happen, all that was required was for the cemetery commission to, I don't believe it takes an additional action.
Well, you might want to check
We'll
with council.
check it, we'll
Yeah,
check that.
because I agree with Ed that we voted that, but I'm not
Right.
sure what the force and effect was vis-à-vis the cemetery commission vote.
Well, Joe and I remember that when we go. Michael?
The only thing I'm gonna ask again, because I ask every week, but I'll keep the list low. I would really like to get the letter thanking all the people and departments that helped us
Yeah,
in the tornado, before the next tornado. So we could,
You're going to be around 100 years from now?
sure, but it's been a while now, and if we could, I know everybody's busy, but I
Okay.
think we owe a lot of other communities a big thanks.
Stephen?
Nothing.
And I'm nothing, so I'll entertain a motion to
So
adjourn.
moved.
Second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.